Good morning, everyone. We are live here at the NASA Space Apps Challenge in Oshawa, and I'm really delighted to welcome you here today. My name's Professor Carolyn McGregor, and as we mentioned during the opening, I'm going to spend a little bit of time providing a talk about the research that I'm performing on the International Space Station currently, and also just about this form of research in general. If this area isn't of interest to you and you want to continue with the hackathon piece, by all means, please do that. I just ask that you try and be quiet while I'm giving the talk. Hopefully everyone can hear me online that is watching this online in the live stream. So I've titled my talk today, Artificial Intelligence for Health, Wellness, Resilience and Adaptation in Space. So I'm a computer science researcher, but I'm actually, I've learned a lot about physiology and particularly things that happen to the body in space. So I'm going to talk about that today, and I'm going to tell you about this. This is one of Canada's contributions to the International Space Station, not this particular one, but this model, this idea. It's called the Biomonitor Garment. This is the Astroskin. I'm going to talk about this more today. This is what we use. Now, a lot of people know that Canada has contributed the Canadarm to the International Space Station, but perhaps not a lot of people know that one of the major devices that's used to monitor the astronauts in space is actually one of Canada's contributions as well. And because this is being contributed by Canada, it means that we get crew time to ask crew to be part of our studies and to participate in our studies. So I'm going to be talking about that today. Now, this is the launch for when Yuri Gagarin went into space in 1961. This is the video stream from that launch. So a special piece of video. I don't know why the sound's gone. Not that the sound is from the launch. So ignition rockets, takeoff. Don't know why it's paused it. Maybe it's got to the end. So that is, as I mentioned, video feed from during his launch. What a lot of people don't know, and I didn't until I had the good opportunity to work with his cardiologist, the founding space cardiologist Roman Baevsky. I was very blessed to work with him from when he was 80 till when he passed at the age of 91 a few years ago. And I learned that during this launch mission, or during this mission with Yuri Gagarin, he was actually wearing an electrocardiogram monitoring device. So he was wearing a strap around his chest that was measuring what was happening to his heart through this whole flight. What was interesting, though, is that the data unit that was collecting the information came back down to Earth. They connected it to some paper tape, because at that stage, when you had electrocardiogram devices that were measuring the valve movement activity, you just printed it off on paper onto a paper tape. And then they literally used a ruler to measure the distance between certain points on that paper tracing of when the valves were moving in his heart through the launch and through the whole mission and the return to Earth, to start to understand how his body was behaving in space. So right from that first successful mission and ongoing, we've always been very interested as humans to understand how it's impacting our body. So a lot of people think that some of these garments, that wearing the watch, that different ways that we monitor our own physiology is something relatively new. And certainly being able to monitor it remotely, you may also think that that is very new. But in reality, we've had technology to be able to do that for quite some time. It's just been different technology. So this is the cover of a magazine article from 1924. And I really like showing that this year because this is now 100 years. I've been speaking about this article for a few years, but we've now reached the milestone that this was 100 years ago. And they had on the cover the idea of what was called then a radio doctor. So the idea that you could see a doctor remotely. You can look up this radio doctor article online. You can actually see the whole magazine online and read the article. And what you will learn is that at the time, they put together this idea of being able to remotely monitor someone with the technology that they had then. And if you read the article and look at the architecture, it would have worked. But what was really interesting was 100 years ago, they did this as a joke because they didn't actually understand and see why anyone would ever want to talk to a doctor remotely. Why wouldn't you want to have that experience right with them there? And so that's the thing that's been changing over time. Through technology, as we've moved to different technologies over the last 100 years, we've always been able to come up with solutions to be able to do this, but there hasn't been that understanding in our culture, in our belief in being, in all the different countries around the world, until more recently to be able to provide healthcare remotely. And providing healthcare in space is really that ultimate remote location for us. And we have to now think about things like speed of light, because the speed of light impacts how quickly we can find out information from the International Space Station or beyond. So in space, there are two different types of health assessment that happen. There is regular operational health assessment, as well as research studies that we run, like my studies that I'm going to be telling you about in a minute. For the regular operational studies, they're really just check-ins unless the astronaut's condition deteriorates and there's an emergency situation. These check-ins that they do are usually about weekly. They're what we call discontinuous. So like we might wear a watch, or we might wear this garment that I'll tell you about, or we might wear things on Earth and we might be wearing them all the time. They really just do these check-ins. They might test their blood pressure, they might test how their heart's behaving, but they're just these very short windows of time. And they go through checklists to be able to ask them questions that are also questions about their mental health, ask them also physically about how they're feeling. And they follow what we call terrestrial guidelines. So guidelines that are being created on Earth and guidelines that are usual check-in assessments of how somebody is feeling from a health perspective. And they use that information if they're not feeling well to as something called differential diagnosis. So they take in all the information to try and then conclude and decide whether someone is okay, whether they're developing a certain condition. And they do that based on what we currently know. So if you think about when we were going through COVID, which is still, people still are contracting that today, there's certain things that start to happen. You might have a runny nose, you might have a sore throat, you might have difficulty breathing. These are all indications that something's happening in your body. And the same thing happens with a number of different conditions. But in space, we have a real challenge because we have limitations about the size of things we can send into space, how heavy they are, how much power they consume, and also what we call the consumables, the things that can only be used once or a certain amount of time, as opposed to things that are being reused, because we need to do what we call upmass. We have to move all those things up from Earth into space. And that all is impacted by its size and its weight. And how often we have to do that is impacted by what sort of consumable life that it actually has. So these are some of the challenges. And these are some early photos from some missions previously when they were doing those health assessments. This diagram has lots and lots of information. It's one of the diagrams from my book on engineering medicines in extreme environments, which I'll mention again at the end. But the main thing I'm trying to show you here is that there's lots of things that happen to the human body when you're in space. So your musculoskeletal system, your bones, that all changes because you're not impacted by gravity. And the muscle system around your bones is impacted again because it's not permanently being exercised, and there's ways that they need to exercise in space. Your cardiovascular system, the function of your heart, the way the blood's moving around your body, that all changes. Your neurosensory or your nervous system, your immune system and your metabolic system all change. But you're also stuck in a container that's not very large with people who aren't your family. You develop them as friends perhaps, but they're not the people you would normally be with. You don't get to stand on a beach. You don't get to be in this room today. So that can be stressful for the astronauts. And so there are various things that can impact their mental health or their psychology. And the environment, they're exposed to more radiation, there can be solar flares. So there's lots of things that make this what we call an extreme environment, and lots of things that can really impact them. So here is an image, and it already did something, I went past it, so let me go back to it. Here is an image of the International Space Station, and above that I have two astronauts. The one on the left is a cosmonaut who is wearing the Cosmicar device, which is one of the Russian commissioned devices to measure the electrocardiogram. I've got a bigger picture of those in a minute. And the other one is a garment just like this. This garment is what David Saint-Jacques is wearing in that photo on the right, which is this biomonitor garment infrastructure, and this is part of it. This garment piece is called the Astroscan piece as well. He's also holding a docking station, which is where we can take the data unit and actually download the data to Earth. So in my study, we get the astronauts to wear garments like this. We have to send these garments up into space, but we also have to send the data unit back into space. So I'm going to just go into a bit more detail on these garments. So as I mentioned, on the left-hand side, the Russian Institute for Biomedical Problems, which is the Russian institute that looks after astronaut health, sends up this Cosmicar device. It's about the same size as this one with the leads attached to it with batteries. We have to send these devices up with AA batteries in them because we can't send them up with reusable batteries because that can present a fire risk in space. So they wear the sensors, the data logger collects the data, it's about this size, and then we have to get the data down to Earth. Now, as I said, with this biomonitor garment, which is the Canadian contribution, it is this compression shirt infrastructure. It has, I'll try and put it over here so people online can see as well, it has these sensors inside of it on the top band and also the lower band. It has a respiration strap in it. It could also pick directional information, which we use more so on Earth. But with the garment, it has a connector to go to a headband. So the astronauts wear a headband, and that provides us with electrocardiogram information, particularly from the head as well. So we get a very good picture of what is happening. But the data doesn't stream live. Just like the Cosmicar, it sends data to this particular data unit, and the data unit, as I said, we have to send it up with batteries inside. And so the data is just being logged locally. Now the astronauts also can see what's happening to make sure it's registering properly for us by using an iPad. So we can turn the Bluetooth on this data logger, and it'll connect with the iPad, so they can make sure for us that the data is being collected well and that our study is progressing well whenever we're using the garments. And then we can then take the data from this garment on the data logger, and in my study the astronauts are wearing this for 48-hour blocks, but it's not the same shirt because that might get a bit uncomfortable. They can actually change out of the shirt. We upmass a couple of shirts for them, and they change them out, and then they reconnect the data unit, and we keep going. So we have a little bit of a gap when they're changing it out. When they're on Earth and they wear these garments before they go up, they can't wear it when they go swimming, they don't wear it when they're having a shower, etc. So there are times that we have to have them taking them off and putting them back on again, but we still get a good amount of data to understand how their body is behaving before they go into space and when they're in space and when they come back. So I won't dwell too much on this diagram, but it's mainly showing there have been lots and lots of different studies. These are the ones run by the Russian Institute for Biomedical Problems, but there's lots and lots of studies that are being run in space to understand how human body is changing in space. But a lot of these studies have been run on adult white males. So we haven't spent a lot of time studying biological females, which is in part what my study is for as well. But the data is sitting on this data unit. So on Earth, I go down to Houston and I position equipment, just like this for the astronauts to wear before they go. And then I go down to Houston again and I pick it up. But I can't go to the ISS myself and go and pick up the data unit. So what do? So there is a satellite network that can be utilised for transmitting this type of data. It is how we communicate with the International Space Station. So it's a radio frequency network, and there are a series of these satellites around Earth that enables the communication with the space station, depending on which satellite has the line of sight at that particular point in time. But it's only at 600 megabits per second. That's for everything. That's for the astronauts to chat with their families. That's for the operational teams to be monitoring what's happening. That's for the ground crews to drive the Canadarm when they're having it step around the space station if it's being driven from Earth. And it's for us to transmit our data down. It's all on the same network infrastructure. So we utilise some time. It takes a few hours once the data's on this data unit, because it's 48 hours worth of data. And once the astronauts take the equipment off, it takes a few hours for the data to be processed on that controller that you saw David St-Jacques holding, and then we start the transmission process to send it down. My data goes through this network infrastructure, it goes to NASA, who sends it to CSA, who then forward it on to me. And CSA has this great area called the PTOG, which is where they monitor and manage the running of our studies in space. So Canada really provides a great contribution to the International Space Station. Now you might say, I've spoken about astronauts, why is there a picture of a newborn infant and in a hospital setting? Well, in my research, I actually started with monitoring newborn infants when they're born early and they're in a critical care environment in a neonatal intensive care unit, because we wanted to, in real time, watch very high volumes of data to understand when these neonates' condition is changing. And by high volumes of data, I mean 1,000 readings a second to get the electrocardiogram trace so we can properly check when their heart rate is, when their heart valves are moving. We monitor their blood oxygen saturation, their blood pressure, and their respiration as well. And I created a system to be able to monitor lots of different conditions that those babies can develop. But I presented that at an innovation conference with this astronaut, retired astronaut Dave Williams from Canada. He's an emergency physician who trained to be an astronaut and had several missions in space. He ran a dedicated series of studies on the human body when he was in space. And he said, you know, that system that you've created for those babies, that's what we actually need for astronauts, to be able to watch what's happening with them. So he introduced me to the Canadian Space Agency, he introduced me to NASA, who introduced me to the Russian Institute for Biomedical Problems. And I have to say, yes, as the first person in my family to go to university, there's this thing called imposter syndrome. Is it really me? Am I really doing this? And it tends to pop up even now, that I've had this wonderful opportunity to work on and create these solutions. So with astronauts, as I mentioned, they're in an extreme environment. They're floating around in a microgravity setting. They're confined to the space station unless they're going on a walk, but they still want to stay connected to it. They have greater exposure to radiation and many terrestrial conditions that they could still get on Earth. mental health challenges as well because of confinement. We have to support them that way, and we have to monitor how their body's changing back on Earth. So he said that I want to allow you to learn what we know so far about monitoring in space to see how you could create a system for that. So without going into a lot of detail, the top part is what we install on, if I can move my mouse there, the top part is what we install on the actual space station, or what we can do, and this is what my research is ultimately moving towards. At the moment I'm just collecting the data and we're bringing it down to Earth. But the idea is we can run live systems on the station and on any spacecraft or habitat on in cislunar, in below Earth orbit, or on the Moon, or even Mars, send it back to Earth. And then we're really starting to be limited just by the speed of light. This is a more modern picture of that architecture. There's lots of components. So as a computer scientist, we work on how we can move data around reliably, securely, make sure it's available, and how we can use artificial intelligence to watch for how their bodies are changing. So one of the first things that I was able to work on is this algorithm that really understands how much stress their body is under. And this was the work of that founding cardiologist, Roman Baevsky. It's in two dimensions. The vertical dimension is in the short term. How much stress is the body under in the short term? And then the horizontal dimension is how much stress is the body under in the longer term. So you can equate this to yourself if you've got a test coming up, or if you've got something that's causing you a lot of stress. That's something that's happening on that particular day. But if you have a series of tests, or if you have lots of things going on, then you're under stress for a longer period of time. So when you're not under stress, you're in the bottom right-hand quadrant. When you're under a short-term stress, you move to the top right-hand quadrant, but the longer you're under stress, it goes across to the left. So he created a way to monitor that, but it was only done on average for a day, which you lose a lot of information when it's done that way. So I worked with him on this particular simulated mission where an all-female crew simulated in a spacecraft on Earth. They simulated a mission of going to the Moon, and we created this way to monitor them where we were watching them for more than just a daily average. So here are some of the results. On the left-hand side, these are two different participants. You'll see their daily score. And then here are their hourly scores and their scores every 5 minutes. So this is what I'm now, or one of the things that I'm now doing with astronauts in space. We're really starting to understand, as they're going about their operations on the space station, what things are more or less stressful for them and for their cardiovascular system, or their heart and their breathing and the movement of the blood around their body, and how can we better understand that? And how can we better understand that for biological males, and how can we better understand that for biological females, because the bodies are constructed differently between the two. We also can do some testing for this on Earth. These are called dry immersion tanks. They're like swimming pools, but there's fabric to protect the people from getting wet. So we create this way that people can float as they would float in space, but their head is not floating in that setting. But it still gives us the ability to understand what's happening in their body. So we've performed, I was part of a couple of missions that have been doing that. This is the Mars 500 facility. This facility is, if you look at the bottom the bottom right photo, has the long tube in the lighter brown. That's the simulated transport capsule. And then the piece going up on an angle is a set of stairs going up to an environment that you can see me on in the middle, which is a simulated Mars surface. So in this mission, Russia isolated a group of men for 500 days. The spacecraft runs completely autonomously. It's contained in a building, but it all runs completely autonomously. So they were on a mission on their own for 500 days. At the 250 mark, they were able to open the hatch, go up the ramp to the Mars surface to collect some samples, and then they returned back down to the capsule for another 250 days. And this environment was what the female crew used, just the capsule component, when they did the 7-day moon mission. So yes, in some ways I've been to Mars because I've been into that facility. But I've also been to the moon in Ottawa. So many of you won't know, and my colleague Perea is laughing because he was actually there with me, was it last week? So this is an amazing facility that we have right here in Canada. It's at a facility called Mission Control, and they have provisioned an environment to mimic the moon's surface. Now, the two photos on the bottom left and right are photos taken in that facility, as is the one of me in the middle. But depending on the lighting and the way the camera adjusts to it is whether or not it picks up the color, or I haven't changed them to black and white. This is the way that the photos come out and the environment looks when you're there. It is designed to get the lighting for what they have to deal with on Earth as well as the terrain. And why is the lighting important? The lighting is really important because you have really long shadows on the moon, as we were being told when we were there last week. And learning how to perceive distance when you have these really unusual lighting environments with really long shadows is a really interesting problem for optical systems to be able to pick up. So when anyone asks me if I've been to the moon and Mars, I can sort of say yes. My research study on the International Space Station is called Space Health. I'm using what's called big data, because there's lots of data that I'm collecting, and artificial intelligence techniques to both understand the physiology and the adaptation of astronauts that we have currently going to the station who enroll in my study, but to also show how we can deploy new systems in the future to be able to have these systems run in real time on the spacecraft to send data to Earth. The diagram you see is the mission diagram for my study. That is the logo for Space Health. And you can find more at those links that you can see there, or just look up Biomonitor, McGregor and CSA, and you should be able to find the information for my study. It is in English and Francais. This is the close-up of the actual equipment, as I mentioned, the Biomonitor garment, and how we dock these particular data units into that docking station that you can see David St. Jacques holding. I also have the privilege, my second study is to run something similar for the private astronauts. So I had the privilege to be one of the mission research scientists on the Axiom AX-1 mission, under the leadership of Mark Pathy for the Canadian complement of research studies that were part of the mission. So I was able to monitor the astronauts who went on that short-term mission, originally planned for 11 days, it went to 17 because of weather, to monitor their physiology in space and before and after on Earth as well. But as I mentioned, at the moment we have radio frequency satellites around Earth to communicate with the International Space Station, but we have the potential for so much more when we connect with the moon and when we set up infrastructure there. So this is a diagram for the Comstar satellite infrastructure. They'll be positioning a hybrid satellite within 41,632 roughly miles of the moon in orbit there, and it will be both optical and radio frequency. So we'll be able to send signals when then we really are limited by the speed of light, and we have a lot more ability to send a lot more data between Earth and the moon and in both directions to be able to do this real-time monitoring both locally and bring the data down to Earth for more analysis. Just a quick diagram about what we do in computing to understand how we can set up these types of infrastructures to move the data around. And one of the things that my colleague here, Perea, is working on, Professor Perea Madani, is looking at the cybersecurity infrastructures that we need in space and the ability to communicate between the satellites as well, because we have a lot of different constraints when we work in space. So these are some of the things that we are contributing towards the further missions beyond LEO and to the moon and Mars. But wait, there's more. One of the other key areas Canada is contributing is to continue our leadership in health in space. So Canadian Space Agency commissioned the creation of 5 of what they call C2M2 or Connected Care Medical Modules, so that we can have these pods available in space for human health. So I was part of one of the teams led by CGI who was awarded the funding to create one of these pods. Our one was called Team Harmony, and it is an acronym for Health and Resilience Monitoring, and I can't remember the other O in the end, but I know Y is yonder, and I did make up the acronym, and I'm sorry, I can't, it's not coming to me right now, but it is an acronym for Harmony. It has a virtual concierge to greet them, telemetry with these types of garments and other non-wearables, behavioural assessments using standardised checklists, and also virtual reality training. So Canadian Space Agency's commissioned these and continues to lead in how we can provision health in space. But it's not just about space. As I was mentioning, 100 years ago, they were thinking about remote care, and Canada and the country that I'm from, Australia, have these challenges with rural and remote care. So the work that I'm doing is not just for space. The work that I am doing is looking at how we can provision care to those rural and remote locations, which is really important in these two countries, but also moving forward. So that's a little bit about my research, a little bit about what we're doing, a little bit about the Canadian Space Agency contribution to the International Space Station. I'd like to thank all the partners that I have in my research, both here on Earth and in space. This is the book that I was referring to. It's called Engineering and Medicine in Extreme Environments. We talk about a number of extreme settings: firefighters, tactical officers, astronauts, even high altitude, diving. These are all areas where we're working to understand human bodies in these extremes. If you want to follow my work on Instagram, it's CP McGregor. On X or Twitter, I've got the two handles there. You can see what we're doing to contribute in this area in the world. I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your hackathon, and for those who are watching after as a bit of interest, I hope you found it really interesting to learn a little bit more about what we do here at Ontario Tech University, and in collaboration with the Canadian Space Agency and NASA and Russian Institute for Biomedical Problems on artificial intelligence for health, wellness, resilience and adaptation in space. And I'm happy to take any questions. But thank you. Merci. Are there any questions in the room or online? Yes.
Did you face any challenges, or is there a thing that didn't work as well as you thought? It looks great, but you probably face some problem during your program, or
Yeah.
what was the risk also of that?
Yeah. So it's been some of the interesting things when, Teresa, one of my other colleagues, Teresa Madani, is coming in. One of the challenges we've had with these data units is when the Bluetooth is turned on, the battery life is drained for longer. We have to make sure that the battery life lasts. But even also with the fit of these garments, really starting to understand how to have garments that fit the female frame as well as garments that fit the male frame. And even that, everybody's a different. Some male have a V shape or a H shape. So when you have a fixed garment like this and that's shaped, understanding how we can make sure that that fits. The garments in space, we also have had to, or they've had to have microbial agents within them so that they're self-cleaning. But on Earth we are able to clean them, but we have to take care, and looking at how durable are they when we do things like run them through washing machines. The ability to just collect data, wearing it, understanding when they're moving around, where the data is being collected. These all present different challenges for us when they're using the garment. So thank you for the question. Any other questions? Any questions online? Right. Well, thank you very much, and I hope you continue to enjoy the hackathon, or you've enjoyed this presentation if you're watching it afterwards. And we're really delighted to host you here at Ontario Tech University. So thank you.